Welcome to Blaze News, the mandate day 27. I'm Jill Savage. Tonight on the agenda, Attorney General Pam Bondi was expected to release the Epstein files today. And phase one contained 22 parts, but there's still a lot of missing pieces. In a letter to FBI Director Kash Patel, Bondi made the bombshell claim that the FBI was withholding files from her. Bondi said that late yesterday, I learned from a source that the FBI field office in New York was in possession of thousands of pages of documents related to the investigation and indictment of Epstein. But despite my repeated requests, the FBI never disclosed the existence of these files. Blaze Media's very own Liz Wheeler was at the White House with the binder of Epstein files.
It's not the extent of the Epstein files, that there were hundreds, if not thousands, of other documents and files and pieces of evidence that the SDNY, the most corrupt district in the United States, was hiding. They were hiding from President Trump. They were hiding from Vice President Vance. They were hiding from Attorney General Pam Bondi. They were hiding from FBI Director Kash Patel. They were hiding from you.
Elsewhere, the IRS whistleblowers in the Hunter Biden case have filed a complaint against U.S. Attorney General David Weiss, accusing him that the Biden DOJ was allegedly retaliating against them and blocking the investigation into Weiss's actions. President Trump floated a plan to allow qualifying foreign nationals to purchase American citizenship for $5 million. Watch.
We're going to be selling a gold card. You have a green card. This is a gold card. We're going to be putting a price on that card of about $5 million, and that's going to give you green card privileges plus. It's going to be a route to citizenship. And wealthy people will be coming into our country by buying this card. They'll be wealthy, and they'll be successful, and they'll be spending a lot of money and paying a lot of taxes and employing a lot of people. And we think it's going to be extremely successful.
Now, America wouldn't be the first to employ this plan. The UK, Canada, and over 60% of EU member states have similar programs. President Trump also announced that the 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada will go into effect on March 4th unless both countries make serious progress on his demands to stop the flow of fentanyl into America.
The drugs continue to pour into our country, killing hundreds of thousands of people. We're losing substantially more than 100,000 people. I mean, dead. They're dead. The families are destroyed after that happens. So.
Finally, in a recent internal memo, the Pentagon said that service members who identify as transgender or exhibit gender dysphoria are disqualified from service without an exemption. Now, these service members may be considered for a waiver on a case-by-case basis. Now, let's bring in Rob Eno, our resident media critic, who is filling in for Matthew Peterson for the next couple of days. So we look at this Epstein drama, right? We were promised that we were going to get the files. There was a big fight in conservatism saying, you promised us, Pam Bondi, where are the files? Then she went on TV last night saying you would see them today. Well, we do see some of them today, but a lot of people are saying this is a huge disappointment, Rob.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just the contact list, right? It's Epstein's contact list. Because you were in Epstein's book doesn't mean that you were a client, right? So this isn't, quote unquote, Epstein's black book. It's a list of people that Epstein might have had in his contact. And that's not what we were expecting when we wanted to get the Epstein files. But what we found out is really that the reason that we don't have the Epstein files is because people that were protecting Jeffrey Epstein, and more importantly, protecting the people that are probably in the Epstein files listed as clients, were being stopped by the deep state, people at the Southern District of New York and the FBI New York field office, which work hand in hand.
So do we think that we're actually going to get these files right? This is what everybody wants to know. Everybody out there on X is always replying to us saying, if we want anything, we want the Epstein list. Do we think that we're actually going to get this?
I think that we are going to get it. I mean, Glenn Beck today said that Trump should get on the plane and go to the SDNY office himself, walk into the office and say, show me where these are right now. Kash Patel has promised Pam Bondi that by 8 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow that she will have them on her desk. I don't think we get them tomorrow because it's going to take a review. But I think that we will at some point in time get these. I hope that we do, because it's a promise that Donald Trump made to the American people.
Yeah, Pam Bondi said last Friday that she had the files on her desk, but she did say that she wanted to go through and make sure that all the victims' names were crossed out because she didn't want to add any harm to them, which makes sense. So if she does get more files on her desk tomorrow, we're not going to necessarily have that news dump like you're saying.
Right. I don't think it'll be tomorrow. It'll be sometime next week.
Well, we look at Liz Wheeler, and she was talking even more than we saw there. She said that there was just one pilot that Epstein has, which I find very interesting, right? You only get one guy, so that's an interesting person to potentially bring forward in a witness case.
Absolutely. I mean, give the guy the fifth, give him the Fifth Amendment protections, have Trump pardon him ahead of time. Just like Biden seemed to pardon everybody so that he has no reason to not say anything in public hearings, I think would be the case. And I just want to give Liz Wheeler a shout out. I mean, Liz Wheeler was one of the few people that got these binders. It was in what is going to make the media's heads explode even more than they already have been, because Chris Bedford got to sit in the cabinet meeting yesterday, our friend Chris, is the fact that Liz Wheeler, Chad Prather, who used to be here on The Blaze, and other right-wing, quote-unquote, influencers, podcast hosts, are the people that got the binders before the mainstream media. Now, there was an embargo. They got them earlier in the day. We couldn't talk about it until a certain time. But Liz Wheeler of Blaze Media got you these files. And our story at Blaze News was up before just about anybody else's story about this was up. So this is, it's really a good thing that the Trump administration is going around the mainstream media, who would have held on to these and not really reported that the story is that their favorite, New York district of the U.S. Attorney's Office was holding on to information that they shouldn't have.
Yeah, it's yet another image of the changing media landscape that we love to see here at Blaze Media. But I look at these files, right? Even if we don't have all of them, if we don't get prosecutions from them, even if we get files, right? At that point, it doesn't really matter if you can't even act upon them. So the prosecutions, to me, are the biggest thing right now.
Absolutely. The prosecutions from the Epstein files, and then there's that, don't forget, there's that sex ring, or the call girl ring that was going on in Boston and Washington, D.C. Those names are supposed to be coming out in the next few months, too. So there are a lot of high-profile, powerful people that are going to be on this list. And I think that that's why, quite frankly, the whole SDNY last week saying, oh, we don't want to be, this is awful, we should be independent. Maybe they were really trying to hide this. Who knows why they were crying? And this could be it. I mean, there's a bunch of reasons that these people have been fighting everything that Trump's been doing tooth and nails.
Absolutely. And just moving on to some of the other headlines, because I love that Trump came out and he's like, you've heard of the green card. This is going to be the gold card, the $5 million there for migrants, and they can pay their way.
Right. I mean, most countries have this. We already had kind of a version of it if you put so much investment. This isn't a payment to the United. This seems like it's a payment to the United States. Here's your $5 million. You're going to do it. We've had in the code that if you invested in real estate projects, and that's how a lot of people get around it. So the left wing, oh my God, they're going to let Chinese terrorists or Chinese spies buy in. I mean, China's bought a ton of land that we know around the country, so this could be it. But it's really interesting because this is how immigration used to work. My mom's family, when they came in 1962, her uncle had to put up his house to say that they would not take welfare. And now you kind of get welfare the moment you cross over the border. Mm-hmm. It's insane.
Part of the deal. Yeah. Trump is part of the deal. He loves that more than anything. We see tariffs back on the table now for Mexico and Canada. And he kind of went straight up to that line, to the deadline last time, dealing with these countries. So are we going to have a deal before March 4th this time, or do you think that the tariffs are actually going to be put in place this time?
I think that the tariffs on China will get raised. He said that he's going to raise that by another 10%. I do think that there will probably be a deal. This is, hey, show us what you did. I know on the Mexican front, I mean, we had here in Texas an IED explode and kill a rancher that was allegedly put up or supposedly put up by a cartel. So that will probably get brought up in these negotiations. But this is what Trump does. Trump is a Brinksman negotiator. Mm-hmm. He does this. He gets somebody to the table. He gets them to change their mind, and then we move on. Like he did with, Zelensky. All of a sudden, Zelensky is supposed to be at the Oval Office tomorrow talking about the mineral rights that he said I'd never give Trump.
What do you make of this transgender in the military case that we talked about here? Because At some point, if you look at what would have happened before, there would be, discrimination, you can't do this. Do we think that it's still this political climate where that will happen?
Oh, the media is going to absolutely say that this is, anti-trans, that how can you do this? But I think it's going to happen. I mean, there are going to be no trans members of the military. You're going to be, out of the military, and you're not going to be able to serve. And quite frankly, I mean, there are serious mental issues that come with that, with, gender dysphoria. Do you want those people in charge of things in the military?
That is a great point, because there's so many extra things. There are so many extra layers to that. So we're just going to have to wait and see how that one plays out. But don't go anywhere, because we're going to have Mike Davis. He'll give us his legal opinion on today's Epstein documents and more just ahead. Well, have you seen all the news from The Economist? They're forecasting a depression. No, not a recession, a depression by the year 2030. So we're in a perfect storm right now with Social Security and Medicare. They're hitting a breaking point, with the largest generation hitting retirement right now. And a smaller workforce is going to mean a smaller tax base. And you pair that with a growing national debt and the rising cost of living, and you have a pretty big problem. So what are you going to do right now to protect your family for the future? Gold is a safe haven in hard economic times, and Birch Gold makes it easy to diversify your portfolio of your savings into physical gold. Birch Gold will help you transition an existing IRA or 401k into an IRA in gold, and it doesn't cost you a penny out of pocket. So protect your future today. Text Jill to 989898 and get your free info kit on gold and a copy of The Ultimate Guide for Gold in the Trump Era with the foreword written by Donald Trump Jr. So there's no obligation. It's only information. Birch Gold has earned the trust of countless Americans looking to safeguard their savings, and you can count on them too. Text my name Jill to the number 989898 today. Today's so-called Epstein files were not what anyone was asking for, except for maybe those on the client list. But here with more is Mike Davis. He's the founder and president of the Article 3 Project. So, Mike, thanks so much for joining us today. So we have the Southern District of New York. They were tasked with providing these documents to the Trump administration. But how did they manage to withhold this information from the American public?
Well, it is amazing that we have one of the biggest scandals in American history. Attorney General Pam Bondi last night said that there were over 250 victims here, and it's just egregious, the most egregious misconduct imaginable. I want to say cheers to the Attorney General Pam Bondi for moving to get this stuff out there. She said last night that they have to be careful to make sure that they're redacting information that could make these victims get re-victimized by revealing their identity. But it's shocking that it's taken this long. It's taken President Trump and Attorney General Pam Bondi having to step in so the American people know what happened here.
Do you think we'll actually get all of the documents? I know that Attorney Bondi today, in a document, the binder that was obtained by Blaze Media earlier today, in a letter to Kash Patel, said that that SDNY was actually withholding files, and all of a sudden a whistleblower told her that there were thousands of documents that weren't there. So basically what we got today was just the contact list, right? That in a lot of ways had been out there before, a lot of it redacted. Do you think that we'll actually get the full breadth of the documents from these people?
Well, the Attorney General on Fox News last night said that she's going to get these out there other than to redact information that would re-victimize these victims. And so she's publicly stated that, so I would take her word for it. It's inexcusable that they've been dragging their feet so long within these agencies. I mean, the Southern District of New York is withholding documents from the Attorney General of the United States, and that's the problem with the Southern District of New York. They need to get a civics lesson again from Amel Bove, the Deputy Attorney General, the acting Deputy Attorney General, that they're not the Sovereign District of New York. They report to the Deputy Attorney General, who reports to the Attorney General, who reports to the President of the United States, who reports to American voters.
Well, yeah, along those lines, is there any legal justification that you could come up with where you would say, yeah, okay, we can keep these files away from Pam Bondi or the Trump administration, right? If you're a leftist right now, what's going through your head to say, oh, no, there's some legal justification. We can make something up.
Well, you're seeing this all over the government. They're going to their activist judges and saying that the Treasury Secretary, for example, somehow can't look at Treasury payments. I mean, it's insane that we have this deep state mindset that the duly elected president of the United States and his political appointees are somehow forbidden from looking at information or directing people within the executive branch. That is the president's core constitutional responsibility and duty under Article 2 of the Constitution. He has all of the executive power, and this idea that people within the executive branch don't report to the president of the United States is not only asinine, it's dangerous.
Yeah, Mike, I want to get into another Supreme Court ruling with you because it was a recent ruling that was delaying a court-mandated deadline for the Trump administration to pay out nearly $2 billion to these foreign aid groups, right? And this comes after the U.S. District Court ruled that the Trump administration had violated the terms of the temporary restraining order that had frozen that foreign aid. So can you explain that for us?
So President Trump campaigned on the fact that he's going to hire Elon Musk. He's going to set up DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, and they're going to root out waste, fraud, and abuse within the executive branch. And that is not only within the president's executive responsibilities, it's one of the president's executive duties under Article 2 of the Constitution. He has the constitutional duty to take care that our laws are faithfully executed. And that includes appropriations by Congress. The president has to make sure that appropriations by Congress are not being subject to waste, fraud, and abuse. We have to make sure, for example, that money that's supposed to go to UN aid relief in Gaza is not going to Hamas terrorists who are raping, torturing, murdering, kidnapping Americans and Israelis. And you have these activist judges, these two whack job activist judges who just got confirmed recently by the Senate Democrats and appointed by Joe Biden, who say that the president of the United States not only can't exercise his core Article 2 powers to take care that our laws are faithfully executed. These activist judges are saying the president has to just mindlessly send out $2 billion without making sure that there's not waste, fraud, and abuse. Fortunately, the Chief Justice of the United States, John Roberts, put an end to this nonsense last night, and he issued an order saying that these lower courts need to stand down until the Supreme Court rules on this matter.
Yeah, in the Supreme Court's ruling on the matter, if my memory serves me correctly, in the the early 1970s, the Impoundment Control Act came in, which would stop impoundments. That's just the impoundment's a fancy way of saying the president can stop money from being spent that's been appropriated, right? And it seems like the Trump administration is on a crash course with the judiciary and the Congress to try and get that reversed, right? To say that the Impoundment Control Act, I believe, is unconstitutional. And it seems like Congress has abdicated its responsibility in a bunch of ways. It's just, here's a pot of money, use it to do X, Y, Z broadly, which means that the president probably has the ability to say where exactly it's going to be spent. What are your thoughts on that? Are we headed for a landmark case, maybe saying that the Impoundment Control Act is unconstitutional?
So we have President Trump's Office of Management and Budget Director Russ Vought, along with his general counsel, Mark Paoletta, two of my very good friends who take the position that the president under Article 2 of the Constitution has the power to impound funds that are appropriated by Congress. There are other people who say that once Congress appropriates the funds, they have the power of the purse. The president is essentially a mindless monkey and just has to issue the checks. Regardless of what side you're on, I think that there's very little disagreements that if Congress appropriates money and it's being misspent with waste, fraud, and abuse, the president under Article 2's take care clause can absolutely stop that, right? If Congress appropriates money for the UN in Gaza under the false pretense that it's going to go feed starving Gazans, and then the president correctly understands, oh, wait, this isn't going to starving Gazans. This is going to Hamas, where they're raping and murdering and torturing and kidnapping women, children, babies, the elderly, the disabled. The president, of course, under the Article 2 take care clause and the president's chief executive officer power and his commander-in-chief power can stop those, right? And so, again, this idea that the president is just some mindless monkey that issues checks on behalf of Congress is just not correct.
Yeah, I love it. It's one of his big talking points for about the last 30 years or so. So he's going to be excited to get this one going. But I want to go back to the judges with you, because we do see representatives like Eli Crane and others that are going out there and trying to say we need to start impeaching some of these judges. What would you say? And do we need to see more of the members of Congress calling out these judges?
Well, I'm glad that the Chief Justice of the United States, John Roberts, not exactly a MAGA fan. I've never seen him wearing a MAGA hat. I've never seen Trump signs in his yard in Chevy Chase. But I think the Chief Justice understands when you have these radical left-wing lunatic activist judges appointed by Joe Biden telling the president that he has to appropriate, he has to spend funds that the president wants to review to make sure are not being misspent. They're not supporting terrorism in Gaza, for example. I think that these judges are overstepping their bounds. We have President Trump, who is exercising core Article 2 powers under the Constitution, executive powers. President Trump's not trying to steal the Congress's legislative powers under Article 1, or he's not trying to steal the Supreme Court's judicial powers under Article 3. He's exercising Article 2 executive powers. And when you have activist judges trying to sabotage the president when he's exercising his Article 2 executive powers, something needs to happen. Congress needs to step in with oversight. Congress needs to step in with the power of the purse. Congress needs to step in and take away their jurisdiction. And if we have to, the Congress needs to step in and impeach these rogue activist left-wing judges.
Well, let's hope that we start seeing some of that. It's good to see the administration coming together, things, slowly getting turned around out there in Washington, D.C. It's going to take some time, though. But thanks so much for your time, Mike Davis.
Thank you very much.
Don't go anywhere. When we come back, Chris Bedford will have an exclusive interview just ahead. Blaze Media senior politics editor Chris Bedford recently sat down with Daniel Turner, who's the founder and executive director of Power the Future. It's a nonprofit group that pushes back on radical green groups. And they get into the Keystone Pipeline and how the green agenda slows down the economy. Watch.
I'm here with the executive director and founder of Power the Future, Daniel Turner, a friend of the show, a friend of the Blaze, who's been on a couple times. And Power the Future is an interesting organization because it works with a lot of the smaller oil and gas companies and the workers and not those giant corporate conglomerates that so often conspire against the American worker, but with the people who are actually out there taking the risks and who are, because of that, financially, economically, their jobs are at risk. Daniel, thank you for joining.
Oh, it's great to be with you, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Once again, in this weird sense of deja vu, Keystone Pipeline is in the news. I feel like it was in the news 4 years ago. I feel like it was in the news 4 years before that. What's newest with Keystone Pipeline, and how long has this been going on for?
Yeah. President Trump just the other day, around 8 o'clock at night, he put out a post on his Truth Social platform encouraging the current or former owners and operators or anyone else to restart the pipeline. And he's right. We needed that 850,000 barrels of oil that was expected to arrive every day via the pipeline. Now, for reference, we still get oil from that part of Canada. We get around 60,000 barrels a day, but it comes from train or by truck. And so it's expensive and it's slow. The pipeline would have been a game changer. So he's right to say, wouldn't it be great if Keystone reopened? But I don't think he realizes that no company is willing to take such a risk again, because sadly, after what Joe Biden did, they don't trust the American electoral process. They don't trust, just paint the simplest scenario. We restart Keystone, whoever does it invests $2.5 billion and a year worth of buying 1,200 miles of steel pipeline. Like, that's a lot of acquisition. And we get to 2028 and Gavin Newsom is running for president, and all he does is campaign on, and when I'm elected, I will shut down that pipeline. Why would I ever take that risk of any infrastructure project the way Joe Biden did when they will campaign on shutting me down? And so that's a huge hurdle that the government has to overcome for serious infrastructure investment in this country again. And it's tragic.
Now, if you go down to the Department of Labor's building or the Department of Energy's building or some of the old Art Deco buildings around the country, if you go to the Empire State Building in New York, you see this image of the American worker, muscular, hammering away, hard hat on, digging, laying railroad, laying pipeline. But it seems like those institutions in our government and a lot of these bureaucrats who right now seem to be losing their jobs aren't actually on the side of the American worker. Am I wrong there, or is that the case?
No, you're 100% right, and this has really changed in the last 15 or so years. You've been in this game long enough that you'll remember, a lot of your audience may remember, but at the beginning of the Obama administration, I think about this all the time. The beginning of the Obama administration, MSNBC hired Spike Lee, and they launched a huge new ad campaign called Lean Forward. And they had all of their anchors all throughout the country in front of these huge monuments. And Chris Matthews and Rachel Maddow at the Hoover Dam saying, how come we don't build great things like this anymore? That Democrat Party is dead, right? The idea that we're going to build a dam, a hydroelectric power, that Democrat Party has absolutely, it's not dead, it was killed by the radical left, by the deep state people who work at those agencies, by these crazy Chinese and Russian-funded green groups. The idea that we will build great things again. Now, President Trump is a different type of person. He wants to build, but Democrats don't want to build a damn thing ever again in this country.
Why not? I mean, I remember in those lean-in advertisements, the Rachel Maddow lookalike, that little guy, he wasn't sitting in front of any monuments. He was riding across a great monument, the Brooklyn Bridge, but he was on his bicycle. It was mainly about how he rides his bicycle to work so he could reduce his carbon footprint. It's always kind of amazing how many people who live in Manhattan, a city where it actually is smoggy and kind of gross, think that the rest of the country is like their gross little island city.
Yes, and it's amazing how a city like New York, which I grew up in and I know pretty well, if it had an actual functioning government, people would take the subway to work, but they can't right now because they're too damn afraid. So you wouldn't need to bike to work. But now we're going down the rabbit hole. But you're absolutely right in the sense that these Democrats don't want to build great things because they will always find a reason not to. And just look at the current Democrats right now. Look at their list of grievances against Doge. There's always a reason why we can't cut the budget. Nancy Pelosi yesterday on the House floor, we can't cut the budget because old people will die. Hakeem Jeffries, we can't cut the budget because the handicap will die. There's always a reason why we can't do anything big in this country. We've been handicapped, stifled, just smothered for decades of inertia. And this idea of building the Hoover Dam or building the Keystone Pipeline is now daunting to a level that you're not going to get that investment. I was talking to the great governor of Alaska, Governor Dunleavy, who wants to build this natural gas pipeline. That's a 15-year project. That's 4 presidential cycles. To invest $40 billion in a 15-year project, as good of a project as it will be, the government's going to have to put up some guarantees because otherwise they're always going to find a green group or a native group or a short-haired Arctic grouse that will use the Endangered Species Act. They will always find a way to kill progress. That's what the new Democrat Party is.
We've learned from Doge and some things that we've actually, you and I have talked about for years. We've written about it, the Daily Caller, the Federalist, Blaze News, that a lot of these green groups are funded in part through lawsuits that our government makes against energy companies and producers and actual places that employ American people. They take that money, they win in their lawsuit over the short-haired grouse or whatever, and they plow it back into green groups and then continue suing and trying to slow actually slow any kind of economic progress, slow job growth. The only jobs they actually care about people losing are in the federal government. They don't care about Keystone Pipeline jobs, as you've pointed out before. How much of that is actually that infrastructure has been impacted by the decisions to cut that have been coming from this administration? And what's the future of these green groups? Can they survive?
Yeah, it's a great point. And this frivolous lawsuit, it permeates all of our economy. But the environmental movement uses it to the most of their advantage. And Obama really put this on steroids. Every time a green group would sue, if you settle out of court, the recuperated funds go back to the green group or to something similar. It's part of the reason why groups like Stacey Abrams received $2 billion, or was scheduled to receive $2 billion from the Biden EPA. She wasn't going to build anything with $2 billion. She wasn't going to put up shingles or energy efficient windows. She was going to use it for activist purposes to elect Democrats, but also to sue and keep this ongoing. This is a huge congressional requirement. And of course, anytime you talk about tort reform or litigation reform, 90% of our elected officials are lawyers, right? They all kind of back off because everyone knows who butters their bread. But until we have some sort of change in the rule, someone early on in the Trump administration, a couple of weeks ago, months ago, in one of his candid conversations with the press, which, by the way, I saw you do in the cabinet room. It was awesome. Congrats.
That's fun.
In one of his candid conversations, someone asked about loser pays lawsuits, and he nodded and he said, "You know what? We've thought about that. Loser pays. If the Mothers Against Asthma wants to sue for fake grounds and they lose, well, the Mothers Against Asthma should have to pay back attorney's fees, punitive damage, because we're stopping huge infrastructure projects in frivolous lawsuits. And there's always a sympathetic judge. There's always an activist court that will listen to these nonsensical lawsuits. And again, we stifle American growth, and that has to stop.
How does a group like Stacey Abrams, who has no noteworthy expertise in any subject that I've ever seen her speak on or work on, get $2 billion? That's not Congress writing a law that says EPA give $2 billion to Stacey Abrams. That's just Congress saying, here's your money, EPA, and put some of that towards public programs and public health, and then they use it to justify giving it to everyone who they want, all of their friends. How does and what would you even do with $2 billion? Is that just to sue people?
Yeah.
Seems like you could sue everyone in the world. California, one of the world's biggest economies, just put aside $50 million to sue the Trump administration, which seems like pennies in the money that the Democrats deal with nowadays. So how does that money get to a group like Stacey Abrams? Who's in charge of that? And does it really just all go to lawsuits?
A lot of it will. And just for perspective, we get so confused by budget numbers because we talk about $100 trillion here and 50 quadrillion for Ukraine there. And
you got to come back with a quadrillion or I'm not listening.
We lose perspective. But I put out on X a couple hours ago, I said, do you remember the Ice Bucket Challenge and how viral that was 10 years ago? And everyone was dumping, and they raised money for a wonderful cause, right? ALS. That raised $115 million. Stacey Abrams got $2 billion, right? Just in terms of perspective, how much money $2 billion is. I talked to a former attorney general about this, and he said flat out, if you got $2 billion, you'd be in jail from the federal government. How do they get it is because every member of Congress, despite their political proclivities or their bias, they are smart enough to not pass anything stupid that's going to get them in trouble. So they have, $100 billion to promote green awareness tied into the Inflation Reduction Act. It's all a slush fund. And then they give it to the agencies to appropriate as necessary. And that's what DOJ is finding out writ large. No one ever appropriated $50,000 for a transgender puppet show in Mexico. What they did is they appropriated $100 million to advance democracy around the world. And they're like, who's against democracy? And then when the government agencies get their hands on this, they decide, well, I think transgender puppet shows advance democracy. So all Elon is doing is saying that this was the goal, this is the project, it doesn't meet the goal, it's gone, right? If Congress really wanted transgender puppet shows, it's so simple. You could bring a bill to the floor today for $50,000 for a or you could bring a bill to the floor today There are 2 senators from Georgia. Raphael Warnock right now could bring a bill. I want Stacey Abrams to have $2 billion. But even Raphael Warnock, as partisan as he is not that stupid. And that's how this slush fund of democracy has perverted our system, and it's perverted the world, quite frankly.
Where did this go off track? Because, I mean, there was a time where America's rivers were more polluted. I think a lot of the stuff is probably exaggerated. But, I mean, I grew up in Massachusetts where you could see the old movie where a chemical company gave everyone in the town cancer. I mean, there's got to be some kind of a pushback for that and a willingness to clean up the air, the smog in Los Angeles, clean up the waters, make it so you can swim in the Potomac again. But what kind of capture took place to make it so that this one's so far off the rails it just became, I mean, literally carbon, the output of life, is now a pollutant.
Yeah. Just shows you how sciencey the scientists are. But you are absolutely right, and you go back to even images of the 70s and how they've made fun of it in movies. Right, in the movie Anchorman, Will Ferrell's eating and he just throws it out the window. Pollution was commonplace. Dirt was commonplace. Joe Biden talks about growing up in Scranton and how you could go out and wipe your finger across the windshield. I wasn't there. But I'll buy it, right? For once, I'll believe Joe Biden. But rather than look at that and say how bad we are, why don't you look at that and say how far we've come? We have cleaned up waterways. People are fishing in Jamaica Bay between Manhattan, between Queens and Brooklyn, where I grew up, right? The Potomac is getting cleaner. So we have made great progress. But in that process, anytime there's appropriation of money, the left will get their hands on it. And everything the left gets their hands on, they destroy. Universities, the Boy Scouts, Holy Mother Church. Anytime they get their hands on a pot of money, they will use it towards their polluting agenda. And that's why for too long, my entire DC life, we've argued about who's going to manage. And I think now we're at the point, especially with President Trump and Elon Musk's effort, it's no longer about managers. It's about dismantling. No one should have the money again. The states maybe, but the money should not be there ever again because we can't trust the people to manage it properly, and that's the way to go.
Yeah, it's difficult. I've heard the pitch to put this money toward good use, like maybe instead of transgender puppet shows, promote classical architecture and things that denote ancient Greece and democracy. But it seems like it's a difficult animal to tame. It might be easier to just slash and burn. But the money's not just coming from government, and it's obviously these billions and billions of dollars from the green groups that always pretend to be fighting the juggernaut. They always say that they're the underfunded people when actually they're the most funded. The scientists, if you question them, and as a scientist, you lose your funding. It seems like it's the opposite. But it's not just coming from government. It's not just coming from aging hippies mailing in $50 checks. It also seems to be coming from some of the biggest global energy companies on the planet. Whether it's natural gas versus coal or gas itself versus natural gas. Who are some of the players in the big corporate sphere? And are the oil and gas companies even on the side of oil and gas anymore?
Well, it's going to be hard for me to name names and still be alive tomorrow, but I will say this. Power of the Future always represents the little guys, and the little guys produce 80% of our energy. Most of our oil and gas, most of our coal comes from family run. Now, they are wealthy, no doubt, and they're successful, but there are thousands of small mom and pop Chris Bedford oil company that grandpa started in the 1920s, and they employ 400 people. The conglomerate of that is who powers our country, and that's the case across the board, right? And that was some of the pushback on huge corporatism writ large. Would you rather have this giant big box move in or the 15 little mom and pop shops, et cetera? Ongoing argument in economics. And clearly there are multiple players in that, but I prefer the small mom and pop shops, no doubt. I think
they create the middle class.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the problem with the big dogs in any corporate environment is that regulation, government action, they absorb it, right? I mean, if you pass yesterday the House and the Senate repealed the methane tax, huge rule that Joe Biden put a tax on the natural gas industry. We were all paying more for it, right? Because all taxes get passed on. But the small mom and pop shops were the one getting killed. The big dogs were fine with it. Why? Because they can pay a little more in taxes, and they'll just buy out the mom and pop places, who can't afford the new tax. So they're thrilled. They're like, oh, Chris Bedford Oil can't pay? Too bad, Chris Bedford Oil will buy you at 80 cents on the dollar. And that's what's happening across America in all industries, agriculture, farming, drug stores, hardware stores, and energy is just the same. So what we would want and what Power of the Future advocates for are policies that push away, a lot of this regulation to have more small companies rather than fewer big ones. The Democrats are the opposite, though. Ask Elizabeth Warren about banking. She'll tell you she wants to fight the big banks. Her whole career has done nothing but make fewer, bigger, wealthier banks. So the things they advocate for are actually not the results they ever seem to get.
Yeah, the sad reality of Chris Bedford Oil is my family sold thousands and thousands of acres of unfarmable black goopy land in Texas in the 1890s. Turns out that was oil. Maybe we should have held on to that. And then I could, be a major donor to Power of the Future. Daniel, where can people follow you on Twitter? Because you have one of the spiciest, best accounts I've ever seen.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. Daniel Turner, PTF for Power of the Future, on there and across all platforms, or on powerofthefuture.com. And love talking about these issues with your audience. So thanks for having me.
Daniel, thanks for coming on. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Don't go anywhere. We'll unpack the mainstream media's outrage over Trump's selection of journalists right after this. CNN political commentator Scott Jennings recently combated his colleagues over this hysteria at the White House in their changing media press pool.
2023, the Biden administration revoked the hard passes of 442 journalists. And at the time, the White House Correspondents Association took, quote, a non-committal stance. So if you're worried about transparency, Trump is being far more transparent than any recent administration.
But seriously, Scott, why? Rob, do the administrations usually go through and determine who has all of this access, or is this a new development under Trump?
The new development is that the president is saying these are the people that can be in the room when I have private time, right? Like the inside the Oval Office stuff. Yesterday when Chris Bedford got into the cabinet meeting, that's usually what they do, right? But the White House has in the past said who can come into the White House. That's a security thing. There's something called a hard pass, right? And the hard pass allows you to go into the White House whenever you want. You don't have to apply day after day after day. And that's what they took away, were 442 hard passes from media organizations. And the media said, thank you, sir, may we have another. They did absolutely nothing with that, right? And in the media, this White House Correspondents Association is a form of a trade guild, credentialism. You've got to be approved by them. You have to be a real journalist, right? And you have to be one of those people that doesn't put out COVID misinformation or doesn't put out stories that they don't like. They're still the media has not learned that they are not the gatekeepers anymore, that this is 2025, that Joe Rogan actually has more viewers than they do, and that he's actually setting the narrative, and people like us are actually setting the narrative. And they still think that this is 1967 and everybody gets their news from Walter Cronkite and that they can gatekeep information. And that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah, I remember Ann Coulter wrote How to Talk to Liberals If You Must. Well, this is going to be Scott Jennings' version of that. He put this on X. Go ahead and take a look at this one.
It's about shrinking government so that it'll be too small to stop Trump with whatever else is in this plan.
Why would the government stop Trump? Isn't he the head of the government? You're saying the government would be too small to stop Trump. If Trump's the president, why would the government, the bureaucracy, be actively trying to stop him?
Because he is shredding the Constitution and creating an authoritarian dictatorship. That's why.
And no matter who is in office, I'm going to hold them accountable. But more importantly, I'm going to make sure the government is working for the American people.
Both of you all made an interesting point, which is that your view is that Trump is shredding the Constitution. I'd like to hear more about that. But that it seems to me that you all both believe that the unelected part of our government, the bureaucracy, has a responsibility to resist the political leadership. Is that your view?
That's not actually what
not at all.
Oh, sometimes I feel bad for Scott, Rob, when you look at that, and that's what he has to deal with. What's your reaction to that clip?
That's exactly what they said.
Yeah.
They exactly said that that the government is the unelected bureaucracy. I would argue that the unelected bureaucracy is the unconstitutional part of the government. That nowhere in the Constitution does it say that the independent boards can take executive power from the presidency, or that, as our guest called it earlier, the Sovereign District of New York, which is really the Southern District of New York, can act independently of what the administration wants. They're saying that it's not checks and balances, that it's all of this stuff, that the administration doesn't have the power, but the administration was elected. You know, we talked earlier about Doge and Elon Musk. Mm-hmm. What the Trump administration did, which was fantastic, is they took an Obamacare small board and made it Doge. And then when the leftists tried to attack that, the court said, well, no, this is actually a real department. They just slapped a name on top of it, right? But yes, these people think that the government is not people elected. And shrinking the government doesn't mean you're going to become a dictator. It means that you're trying to give more power to the people.
It feels like every time that they went out there and said, oh, it's an authoritarian government. Oh, Trump is going out here and shredding the Constitution. Well, it's just because he's doing things that they don't like, right? It's just that you're not doing things that I want to have happen. So in that case, they just recall, oh, you're a fascist, you're an authoritarian. They just go and revert to name calling every single time.
Right. It is obviously constitutional and in the Constitution that I must go into debt forever and get money stolen at me from the point of a gun to make sure that Zelensky has enough money. Right. I mean, that's obviously part of the Constitution. And if you call into question that, you are obviously a fascist dictator, that you want to do that. And it's insane to me that people in government, and I'm talking about the bureaucracy, think that what they do has value. I mean, the other thing that's hilarious, everybody's up in arms, and these people probably would be, that Elon Musk dared send something out because the president asked him to, asking people to tell him what he did last week, right? Mm-hmm. As Chris Bedford asked the question, this was just to see if people were actually alive in a pulse. You remember the TikTok video of the woman that worked for USAID who 7 days after she was fired said, yesterday I checked my email and I couldn't get into my email at work. You've been fired for 7 days. What do you do?
That's a great question. It's going to be a big problem for Zelensky tomorrow, because I think Donald Trump might ask him that when they meet at the White House. And it's going to be interesting because we do see all of this new media, and the exclusives today, like you were saying, came out to the new media. It wasn't just to legacy media. The big documents that came out, it was all new media.
Yeah, and that's exactly what's happening. I'm interested to see whoever is the pool reporter tomorrow for that Zelensky thing from one of our friendly outfits. Today it was the Daily Signal that got the poll. Yesterday it was us. Tomorrow it could be Breitbart. It could be the Daily Wire. It could be the Daily Caller. Who knows who's going to get that question? And a question will get asked of Zelensky that would normally not get asked. I could see the question being, so how much corruption has stolen the money that USAID has given you?
Yeah, it's going to be fireworks, that's for sure. Don't go anywhere, because we'll break it all down for you tomorrow night. You know it's going to be a good one with Zelensky and Trump meeting. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you back here tomorrow night.